Okay, so when you are looking at the Audacity interface, the next thing after you fixed your latency is what the heck am I even looking at? So I'm going to give you an overview of what this program is capable of just in a very quick and superficial way. It does a lot more than what I'm going to present in this video, but that's just how it is. So let's start with what you're actually looking at. So with any Windows program, you see you have your file menu and a bunch of options: edit, select, view, transport, tracks, generate, effect, all that kind of stuff, right? Let's go first with what you're actually looking at overall and then go into what it means. So in the top left corner here, what you see is your stereotypical tape deck looking thing from back in the day, where you have a pause button, a play button, a stop button, a reverse, and a fast forward button. And in fact, when you, if you have actual audio down here and you hold this down, it'll fast forward instead of jumping to the end if you hold down your mouse button. Or if you just click the mouse button once, it takes you all the way to the end. Same thing with this one. If you click it once, it takes you to the beginning. But you can also rewind by holding your mouse button down. The next thing is the record button. Now, normally this is inactive after you've made your first track. When you make your first track, it'll actually start on one track. But if you hit record again, it'll record at the end of the previous track you were working on. So that means you always have to remember to insert a new track. But on the very first time you hit record, and I'm going to just illustrate it, you'll notice that it automatically generates a track. Now, if I hit stop, and you see that it even picked up my audio, if I hit stop and I hit record again, the recording just starts on that very same track, which means that sometimes you're going to have to click and figure out which track is which, etc. Nonetheless, I'm going to delete that track. Well, how do I do that? Number one, there's a little X right here that says close. But before I even close that, let's kind of look at what the audio even did for us. Notice that as I was talking, the microphone collected my audio in the form of waves, okay? Similarly, when I was recording here. Now, there are some rules about how the audio should go. And in particular, the audio shouldn't be pushing the limits of the edges, but at the same time, it can't be a little narrow wave like these right here, or else the audio isn't good enough for you to use, say, in an interview, etc. So ideally, you want your waves to look a little something like this, all right? Preferably this size would be the ideal size for your audio waves when you're conducting interviews and adding any sort of audio files to it. So anyway, the other thing that you can do with a single track is you can increase its volume in the master list by simply sliding this over in the master mixing thing, or you can just put it at its original levels, or if it's too loud, you can take it down by dragging it to the left. And these are decibel levels. So actually, because decibels are about a magnitude of 10, a little goes a long way when you're adjusting that. The other thing that you can do with an individual track then is you can pan it to the left. So if we were listening to this track and I hit play right here, it would only come out of the left speaker if I hit play. If I panned it all the way to the right, then it would only come out of the right speaker. But at this point, this centers it, and so it would come out of both speakers if you had a left and right speaker, or if that was the case for headphones. Now, why would you do this? For the sake of audio mixing, if you're doing like actual music stuff, you might want a track that's to the left, and then a counter track that goes to the right when you do your next musical piece to go with it. And you might want to spread it out in what is known as a stereo spread. The other thing that you might notice is I have my settings set a certain way, and notice that it's only one stream of a track. In other words, this track was recorded in what is called mono. My settings right here set it at mono. So let me talk about the difference then between those two, all right? So when you're looking at this, and I'm going to delete the track, you're looking at different settings right here. So this is where the audio is coming from. So for me, inside of my computer, there is one microphone, and it's right in front of my little webcam right here. If you hook up a USB microphone or any other sort of microphone, if you hook it up before you load the program, you should see that as an option to record with. Secondly, This setting right here shows how the two different methods through which you can actually record something. Mono means you record one single track, whereas opposed to stereo, it puts it in stereo sound, so there'll be a left and right kind of channel to it. So I'm going to just illustrate that. I'm going to go to a stereo channel, and actually I'm going to try to illustrate what the difference is. So here I am talking in the middle of the stereo track. Now if I record over here, if I'm speaking way over here, one side will get slightly bigger than the other, and vice versa. If I go over here, one of the waves will be slightly bigger than the other. In other words, and you can't really see it too much on this demonstration, but if you zoom in, when I was on the right side here, this wave was bigger than this wave right there. That's because when you record a stereo track, you have a right wave and a left wave, and they try to differentiate the different directions that the sound came into it from. Whereas a mono track, I pick mono, which I think is the easiest method to go with here, especially if you're going to be mixing and doing podcasts. When I hit record, it simply captures the sound as if it was in the middle of the track. And that is basically the difference between a stereo and a mono track. Once again, I'm going to hit the close button to show like how the audio disappears when you do that. The second thing then is right here, these settings are where the sound will come out when you hit replay. So in this case, I have, actually I'm projecting in my class. If I wanted it to come out of the speakers up top, I could pick that, or I could pick the speakers or headphones that are part of my computer, and I'm going to keep it as such. So you're looking at the different settings, like which is the microphone source, what kind of track are you recording, and the third thing is where is the output going, what is the speakers. Okay, so then that brings us to some of these. I'm going to kind of skip this just for a second. I'm going to go right to more microphone and volume stuff. So this microphone icon tells me how much power the microphone is being given to pick up sound in this. Now, sometimes the microphones are turned up way too high, and sometimes they're not turned up enough. This one is showing that it is at 95% recording volume. In other words, if there's a certain amount of energy that is sent to the microphone that's considered 100% of the electricity used to get the volume of that, this microphone is set a little bit lower to that 95% threshold. The thing right next to it then is the volume that is the playback volume. Once again, the playback volume in the program is 86%, which means even though I might have my speakers set to 100% when I want to hear it on my computer, my hardware, only 86% of the drive will actually come out in this volume. Now you can set that to 100%. You can also set your microphone to whatever. And I've noticed too that my microphone changes its settings according to what it thinks is being too loud and too soft. Nonetheless, that's your output volume, and that's also the power at which the microphone is being used. The other thing then I want to show you then is the recording level. If I click this button that says click to start monitoring, it asks me, what do I want to do? I want to start monitoring. Notice that when I talk, the volume goes up and down right here. What you're basically testing is, am I speaking too loud for it? When you see green, you're in pretty good shape. When you start to see yellow, they're starting to say that might be a little too loud. And if I shout into this thing like, ah, that red tells me that the wave is going to be too big and that the sound is going to be garbled when I actually record it. So sometimes you want to start monitoring before you start recording, because if you're in the green on a regular basis, that's a pretty good sign. But if you're pushing on the red because the sensitivity of the microphone is way up, you're going to have problems. In fact, I'm just going to move the sensitivity of the microphone all the way up to 100, and notice I haven't really changed my volume, but I hit the yellow and the red a lot more often. Whereas if I move it back down to about 91, that's usually a good threshold for most microphones. So I don't need to monitor anymore, so I'm going to turn off stop monitoring. Similarly with this, You can monitor to see what your output sounds like, but you'll have to have an audio track, and you should be playing it at that point in time. All right. So then playback speed is currently set at 1.0. In other words, you want it to be playing back to you at the same rate that you recorded it in. But you can accelerate a recording and you can slow it down using this slider right there. So then that takes us to these control buttons right here. Most of the time you will be using the selection tool. Sometimes you'll be using the zoom tool. Sometimes you'll be using a time shift tool, and I'll show how to do that in a separate video. It is very rare to use the envelope tool because that's usually for advanced users where you're adjusting individual waves. It's usually for people that are mixing audio and things like that. Right here then is you have a multi-tool, and that does a bunch of stuff. I rarely use it. And then the last thing is the draw tool. So if I wanted to draw something on the track to remind myself about such and such a thing or to leave a marker, I could do that. But most of the time for podcasting purposes, you're going to be using this and you're going to be using this. So that is what the interface of this thing looks like. Next, I'm just going to record a random track. And here I am recording a random track. And notice it's even monitoring while I'm doing this. And notice that I'm being really loud. Okay? Now, why would I do that? Well, I want you to hear the audio when we get to these claps and things like that. Now, I don't know if you noticed, and I'm going to try to pause it a little more strategically. In fact, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to move the audio directly to a point. What you'll notice is that the output is pushing the limits very high at those points. In fact, I'm going to zoom back out. So I'm going to zoom, and instead of left clicking, because left clicking gets me closer and closer to the wave, right clicking takes me farther and farther out from the wave. Watch what happens when we get to this part of the track over here. And notice that I'm being really loud. And so what happened was when you saw that the audio was at this part of it, we were hitting the red in the playback level. If your volume is too loud when you record things, it will sound garbled and unmanageable. So I wanted to show you those examples simply because being able to work with the audio and knowing what good levels are is going to be foundational to being able to conduct interviews and things like that. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to record a track just so that there's some audio in it. So the last thing that I got to be able to teach you how to do is where will you save your materials and things like that for this program. So I highly recommend to my students that you do the following thing. And I just paused this. On your desktop for school, I suggest that you make a folder called Audacity Projects. And then I also think you should have a folder called Audio Collections. And there's a reason I need you to have both of those. One, when you save an Audacity project, you should save it in this folder. Secondly, notice I have an MP3 file. I had conducted an interview with the student. And I intend to use that audio as part of an Audacity project later. But I don't want to save it in Audacity projects. I actually want to keep it in what is called audio collections. If you ever use music as part of this, which I'm going to teach you how to do, you're going to want to have that in a separate folder known as audio collections. The same thing also I'll say is the audio collections and Audacity folders have to be maintained. In other words, you can't change up the directory in your computer. You can't change your folders and stuff because it will screw up where the audio reference was and where those things were. So you should definitely have a folder on your desktop called Audacity Projects and then the other one called Audio Collections. Okay? Now, going back to the program, I'm going to show you how to save an Audacity project. So you're going to go File, and then you hit Save Project, and I'm going to hit save project as, and they'll be like, it's not an audio file. Just warning you, it's not an audio file. For an audio file, we don't have to worry about that. So I click OK, because we're saving the project. We're not saving the audio file. I'm going to go to my desktop, and on my desktop is that folder called Audacity Projects, and I'm going to give it a name called Tutorial 1. Really, it's tutorial number 2, but who cares? Because I'm just trying to show where to save things. I hit save. And what usually happens at this point is if I look into the folder, you will see that there is a project called Tutorial 1 and that there's a data file. Don't mess with either of those. Now, you can open up Tutorial 1 later as if it's in Audacity, but the folders and stuff in here, I'll even show it to you, have a bunch of random parts to it that do not have meaning to you or I. They have a meaning to Audacity, so don't mess with those files. There will be some issues with that if you do that. Secondly, then, some people are like, okay, so now that we have Audacity, let's say I wanted to export this file as an MP3 or a WAV file. So now we want to actually export the audio. The way that you make a final audio project out of an Audacity project is you go to File, Export, and then you choose how you want to do it. Most people like MP3. WAV files work. Ogg Vorbis, I haven't seen anybody use this in years, but I could be wrong. You could export it as raw audio. You can't do this as MIDI because it's not a computer-generated thing. Nonetheless, let's pick MP3. So when you pick this, I'm going to save this one on the desktop just for the sake of illustration. And then I'm going to hit save. And then before it even saves, it asks me to edit metadata. So when you download an MP3 file from like Amazon or Apple Music or something like that, you'll probably notice that it has a whole bunch of what is called metadata. In this program, you can insert the metadata and type your own things for this. You can put the track number, the year, the genre of the music. You can add your own comments, and then you can hit save. You don't have to do that. If you just want to keep the audio as is, you can just keep it like that. So you hit OK. And what you will notice now is on the desktop, where I have it, is this MP3 file called tutorial. And if I play it, it'll just be an MP3 file. Let's see. So the last thing that I got to be able to teach you how to do is where will you save your materials and things. So you see that it stole the audio that I had there. So even though you might save an Audacity file, what you'll actually turn in will be an MP3 file that's your final project. And so that is basically what you're looking at every single one of these things. Now, I'm going to go into a specific way and a specific thing I'm going to want you guys to learn how to do in a separate video. But this is the ins and outs of what you're looking at when you see an Audacity file and how to save things correctly and how to export an MP3. But I'm probably going to have to review an awful lot of that stuff in other videos. Thank you.